What if the one thing you do every single night before bed, something completely harmless, something you've done for years without a second thought, is quietly pushing your blood sugar higher while you sleep? Not a big meal, not a sugary dessert, something far more ordinary than that. And here's what makes this so unsettling. Most seniors who are managing blood sugar, watching their diet, taking their medication faithfully, doing everything right during the day, have absolutely no idea that what happens in those last 30 to 60 minutes before they close their eyes could be undoing much of that effort. Tonight, that changes, because once you understand what's actually happening inside your body during the night and why certain bedtime habits interfere with that process in a very specific and measurable way, you will never look at your evening routine the same way again. Let me start with something that might feel familiar. You wake up in the morning. You haven't eaten anything in 8 or 9 hours, and yet when you check your blood sugar, it's higher than it was when you went to bed. You didn't sneak a snack at midnight. You didn't break your routine. So why is the number going up instead of down? If this has ever happened to you, or if you've ever stared at that morning reading feeling confused and a little defeated, you are not imagining things, and you are not doing something wrong. There is a physiological explanation for this, and it connects directly to something that happens before you even fall asleep. Stay with me, because this is going to make a lot of things click into place. Before we go further, if you find this kind of honest, practical health information helpful, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel right now. Here at Dr. Silas Redford Wellness, we work hard every single week to bring you research-backed health insights written in plain language, the kind of conversation your doctor wishes they had more time to have with you. Just hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps us reach more seniors who need this information, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Now let's talk about the bedtime habit that most people never suspect. It's not eating late at night, though we'll address that too. It's something quieter, something almost invisible in its impact. The habit is screen time, specifically the blue light exposure that comes from watching television, scrolling through a phone or tablet, or sitting in front of a brightly lit screen in the hour before bed. And what it does to your blood sugar, through a mechanism most people have never heard of, is genuinely alarming once you understand it fully. Here's the connection, explained simply. Your body runs on a biological clock called the circadian rhythm. This internal clock does far more than make you feel sleepy at night. It directly regulates cortisol, the stress hormone. It controls insulin sensitivity, meaning how effectively your cells respond to insulin. And it manages glucose production in your liver, the organ that releases stored sugar into your bloodstream even when you haven't eaten. When that clock gets disrupted, all three of those systems get thrown off. And what disrupts it most powerfully in seniors? Light, specifically artificial blue light in the evening hours. A man named Frank, 73, from Indiana, had been managing his type 2 diabetes for nearly 8 years. He was disciplined. He ate carefully. He walked every morning. His daytime readings were consistently in a healthy range, but his fasting morning glucose, the number he checked right after waking up, had been stubbornly elevated for months, hovering around 130 to 140 when his target was under 110. His doctor kept adjusting his medication, but what no one asked Frank was what he did in the hour before bed. Every single night, Frank watched 2 to 3 hours of television, often falling asleep on the couch with the screen still on. His bedroom had a bright overhead light he kept on while reading on his tablet before finally going to sleep. He was bathing his eyes and brain in artificial light until the moment he closed them. And his blood sugar numbers were reflecting that disruption every single morning. When a sleep specialist explained the cortisol and glucose connection to Frank and helped him restructure his evenings, his fasting numbers dropped by nearly 20 points within 3 weeks. Same medication, same diet, different evening routine. But what happened in Frank's body that caused this? Here's the part that researchers only fully began to understand in the last decade. And it's one of the most important pieces of endocrinological science that seniors almost never hear about. In the hours before sleep, your body is supposed to experience a significant drop in cortisol. Cortisol is naturally high in the morning, giving you energy and mental sharpness, and it's supposed to taper down through the day, reaching its lowest point at night. This drop in cortisol is essential because cortisol directly signals your liver to produce and release glucose. Less cortisol at night means less glucose flooding your system while you sleep. But when artificial light hits your eyes in the evening, particularly blue wavelength light, your brain receives a signal that it's still daytime. Cortisol stays elevated longer than it should, and your liver keeps producing glucose, quietly, steadily, all night long. This is why your morning number is high even though you fasted perfectly. Your liver was working against you while you slept, and it was taking its cues from that glowing screen in your living room. Most seniors never realize this until it's too late, meaning until they've spent years confused about their morning readings, years of medication adjustments, years of blaming their diet for something that was actually a timing and light exposure problem. And the worst part is that this isn't something most standard diabetes management conversations even touch on. You'll hear about carb counting, about medication timing, about exercise, but the bedtime light environment? Almost never. What doctors rarely explain is that your pancreas and liver don't operate in isolation. They are deeply synced to your circadian biology, and when that biology is disrupted night after night, blood sugar control becomes a moving target no matter how clean your daytime habits are. Now, television is the most common culprit, but it's not the only one. Let's talk about a few other bedtime habits that are quietly interfering with blood sugar in ways that surprise most people. The second habit is late-night snacking. And I want to be careful here because the picture is more nuanced than you might expect. The blanket advice has always been don't eat after a certain hour. But the research now tells us it's not just about whether you eat, it's about what you eat and when your personal glucose rhythm peaks. A small protein-based snack like a handful of nuts or a small piece of cheese consumed about an hour before bed can actually stabilize blood sugar overnight for some seniors by preventing the liver from overproducing glucose during a prolonged fast. This is called preventing reactive hypoglycemia followed by a rebound glucose spike, and it's a real phenomenon. However, a carbohydrate-heavy snack, cookies, crackers, cereal, fruit juice, eaten within an hour or two of sleep, hits your bloodstream when your insulin sensitivity is at its lowest point of the entire day. Your cells are less responsive to insulin in the evening hours, which means the same amount of carbohydrate eaten at night causes a significantly higher glucose spike than it would at noon. This is why a cookie before bed is metabolically very different from that same cookie after lunch, even though they're the same food. A woman named Carol, 66, from Georgia, couldn't understand why her blood sugar was so variable. She was careful all day, then rewarded herself with a small bowl of cereal before bed, something she'd done her whole life. She thought it was a light, harmless choice. What she didn't realize was that her evening insulin sensitivity was already reduced because of age-related metabolic changes, and that bowl of cereal was hitting her system at the worst possible time. When she switched to a small handful of walnuts and a slice of turkey instead, her overnight readings stabilized remarkably. Same total calories. Very different metabolic result. The timing of food relative to your circadian clock matters in ways that most nutrition advice completely ignores. The third bedtime habit is one that almost nobody connects to blood sugar, and that is late evening stress. Whether it comes from watching the news, having a difficult phone conversation, worrying about finances or family, or simply lying in bed with a busy mind, emotional and psychological stress in the evening hours triggers a cortisol surge that directly raises blood glucose. This is not a minor or theoretical effect. Research has shown that even a 15-minute period of acute psychological stress can raise blood glucose by 20 to 40 points in people with insulin resistance, and the effect can persist for hours, well into the early morning hours. A retired accountant named Bernard, 79, from Pennsylvania, found that his worst blood sugar mornings always followed evenings when he'd watched distressing news programs or had anxiety-provoking phone calls with family. His body was treating emotional stress the same way it treats physical danger, flooding his system with glucose-raising hormones to prepare for a fight that never came. When Bernard began protecting his evening hours more intentionally, avoiding news after 7 in the evening, practicing 10 minutes of deep breathing before bed, and keeping his phone in another room at night, his morning readings improved more consistently than any single dietary change had managed to achieve. In a moment, I'll explain the fourth habit, which involves something that millions of seniors do every night and consider completely healthy, but which may be doing something unexpected to overnight glucose regulation. But first, let's take a moment to appreciate why the nighttime hours matter so much for blood sugar in the first place. Between roughly midnight and 6 in the morning, your body goes through what physiologists call the dawn phenomenon and the somogy effect. The dawn phenomenon is a natural surge of growth hormone and cortisol that occurs in the early morning hours to prepare your body to wake up. In people with normal insulin function, this surge is easily managed. But in seniors with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, that same surge causes a significant rise in blood glucose that shows up as an elevated fasting reading. The somogy effect is slightly different. It occurs when blood sugar drops too low in the middle of the night, often due to medication or prolonged fasting, and the body overcompensates by releasing a flood of glucagon and cortisol, causing a dramatic rebound high by morning. Both of these phenomena are heavily influenced by what happens in the hours before sleep. Your bedtime habits are essentially setting the stage for how severe or how manageable these overnight fluctuations will be, which is exactly why what you do between 9 and 11 in the evening is so much more important than most people realize. Now, the fourth habit. This one surprises people every time. It's drinking alcohol in the evening. Many seniors enjoy a glass of wine or a small amount of spirits after dinner, and there is a long-standing cultural and even some research-based narrative suggesting moderate alcohol is benign or even beneficial for cardiovascular health. But here's what that narrative misses when it comes to blood sugar specifically. Alcohol is processed almost exclusively by the liver. And while the liver is busy metabolizing alcohol, it temporarily stops doing one of its other critical jobs, which is releasing stored glucose into the bloodstream to maintain stable overnight blood sugar. This creates an initial drop in blood sugar that can last for several hours. So far, that might sound like a good thing. But here's the catch. Once the liver finishes processing the alcohol, it often overcorrects, releasing a surge of glucose into the bloodstream in the early morning hours, right around the time the dawn phenomenon is also occurring. The result is a double glucose spike in the early morning hours that shows up as a dramatically elevated fasting reading. And because the person had a blood sugar drop during the night, they may also have experienced disrupted, less restorative sleep without even being aware of it, because mild hypoglycemia during sleep rarely wakes a person up but significantly reduces sleep quality. So the alcohol that felt relaxing and harmless at 9 in the evening may be responsible for the confusing high reading at 7 the next morning. This is not a judgment about alcohol. It's a biochemical reality, and it's one that most seniors managing blood sugar have never been told. Let's talk now about what you can actually do, because information without action is just anxiety, and that's not what this channel is about. The first change is the simplest and the most immediately impactful. Dim your environment in the final hour before bed. This means turning off overhead lights and switching to a small bedside lamp or a warm amber nightlight. It means reducing screen brightness significantly if you do use a phone or tablet, or ideally switching to a paperback book or an audio program in that last hour. If you watch television in the evening, try moving your final show earlier and giving yourself a screen-free wind-down period before you actually get into bed. You don't have to be perfect. Even a partial reduction in blue light exposure in the final 30 to 45 minutes before sleep creates a measurable improvement in melatonin timing, cortisol reduction, and by extension, overnight glucose stability. The second change is to take a short walk after dinner. Not a long or strenuous walk, just 10 to 15 minutes of gentle movement within an hour or two of your evening meal. This single habit has more clinical research behind it than almost any other simple blood sugar intervention for seniors. Walking after eating causes your muscles to absorb glucose directly from the bloodstream without requiring insulin to do it, which means the post-meal spike is smaller, the overnight baseline is lower, and your liver has less glucose to manage while you sleep. A 15-minute walk, that's it. And the evidence for its effectiveness in reducing fasting morning glucose is remarkable. The third change involves your wind-down routine. Try to create a buffer between the stressful or stimulating parts of your evening and the act of going to bed. Even 10 minutes of quiet, calm activity, whether it's gentle stretching, listening to soft music, writing in a journal, praying, or simply sitting in a quiet room, signals to your nervous system that it is safe to shift into recovery mode. When your nervous system makes that shift, cortisol drops more naturally and completely, your liver receives the signal to slow glucose production, and your body moves more efficiently into the deep, restorative sleep phases where the most important metabolic repair happens. And the fourth change is to speak with your doctor specifically about your morning fasting glucose in the context of your evening habits. Bring this information to your next appointment. Tell them about the dawn phenomenon. Ask about your cortisol rhythm. Ask whether your medication timing might benefit from adjustment based on your overnight glucose pattern. A well-informed patient who comes to their doctor with specific targeted questions gets dramatically better outcomes than one who simply reports symptoms and waits for answers. You deserve to be that patient. Here's what I want you to hold on to as we close today. Your blood sugar is not just a number that your diet and medication control. It is a living, dynamic system that responds to light and darkness, to stress and calm, to timing and rhythm, to the quality of your sleep, and to the environment you create in your own home every single evening. You have more influence over this system than you may have ever been told, and the changes that create the most meaningful improvement are often not the dramatic ones. They're the quiet ones, the dimmed lamp, the evening walk, The phone put down an hour earlier. The news turned off before bedtime. These small, consistent choices compound over time into measurably better health. That is not an opinion. That is what the research shows. And it's what the people who make these changes experience in their own lives. I'd love to hear from you in the comments right now. Tell me, which of these habits did you find most surprising? Or share what your evening routine looks like and whether you've ever connected it to your morning blood sugar. Your experience matters, and your comment might be exactly what someone else in this community needs to read today. We learn from each other here, and that's something truly special. If this video opened your eyes to something new, please share it with someone you care about. A spouse, a sibling, a neighbor, a friend who's been frustrated by their morning numbers. You might be handing them the piece of the puzzle they've been missing for years. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself tonight, and we'll see you in the next one.